So with the Sonos Roam right around the corner, I thought that we explore Sonos a little bit. Now in my previous video, we checked out the Sonos Beam. But today we're going to compare the Sonos Beam to the Bose Smart Soundbar 300, which is an awesome name, by the way. But more importantly, the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 has been my go-to soundbar for a few months now. Regarding pricing, both of these soundbars retail for $400. Now, for the purpose of this review, we're going to be evaluating these soundbars by themselves. But if you want to, you can always build out these soundbars by either adding a sub and or a pair of surround sound speakers. But if you do decide to build out these systems, their total price is going to be way different from one another. With the Bose, if you were to pick up their base module, it's going to run you $400, whereas the Sonos sub retails for $700, which is almost twice as much as the Beam itself. And with the Bose, if you were to pick up their surround sound speakers, it's going to run you $300, whereas with the Beam, you would have to pick up two 1SLs, which is going to run you $358. So the total cost of the Bose system with the soundbar, base module, and surround sound speakers is going to run you $1,060. Whereas with the Sonos, the complete package is going to run you $1,456. So yeah, these systems can definitely get very expensive very quickly. Now, if you're going to be using these soundbars in your bedroom or small living room, then the soundbar by itself is going to be perfectly fine. That's how I use my soundbar. Now first let's talk about the designs of these soundbars. Both of these soundbars have very subtle designs to them with very minimal notification lights, which is great. Soundbars should be heard, not seen, because personally, I absolutely hate when soundbars have constantly power on lights, or when they constantly display the time on the front, because it's completely unnecessary and distracting when you're watching something. Now, even though both of these soundbars are very compact, I do gotta point out that the Bose is a little longer than the Beam, with a length of 27.5 inches, whereas the Beam has a length of 25.5 inches. But when it comes to thickness, the Bose is a little more low profile than the Beam, with a thickness of 2.25 inches, whereas the Beam has a thickness of 2.75 inches. I don't know, personally, I do prefer the Bose's more low profile design because it does look sleeker. However, one very important thing the Beam does have over the Bose is that it does have built-in control buttons, so you can directly adjust your media without having to solely rely on your phone, TV remote, or voice assistant. Whereas the Bose only has two control buttons on it, one to mute the microphone and the other one to activate your voice assistant. Now, the Bose does come included with a remote control, which is nice. But personally, I do wish this soundbar had built-in control buttons for those fringe cases where you just can't reach for your phone, TV remote, soundbar remote, or you just don't want to use your voice assistant. But now let's talk about tech specs. Regarding ports on the back of these soundbars, both of these soundbars have an AC port for power. Pretty basic. But the good thing is that neither of these two soundbars have an external power brick that you gotta hide, which is good. However, I do want to point out that Sonos's power cable does feel a little more premium than the one that you get with Bose. Sonos's cable is a little longer and a little bit more flexible, just making it a little easier to wire into your setup. Now, both of these soundbars have an HDMI port to connect to your TV. However, the Sonos actually comes included with an HDMI cable, whereas with the Bose, if you want to use an HDMI connection, and you should use an HDMI connection, then you are going to have to get your own HDMI cable because the Bose only comes included with an optical cable. However, even though the Sonos doesn't have an optical port like the Bose, which I think is fine, the Sonos does have an Ethernet port. So if you are planning on using the Sonos in an area of the house with spotty Wi-Fi, you could always hardwire it into your network. Now, both of these soundbars have Wi-Fi and AirPlay 2 support. So if you're an iPhone user, as long as you're connected to your Wi-Fi, you can stream music to either of these two soundbars. However, personally, I am not a fan of the Sonos' being over-reliance on Wi-Fi, because let's say your friend were to come over and they wanted to DJ, they can't just simply connect to the beam using a Bluetooth connection. Now, I know this might be a fringe case, but a lot of people like to use their soundbar to play music to entertain guests. Whereas with the Bose, it does have Bluetooth. So whether your friend wants to DJ or if you just got the soundbar in an area of the house with spotty Wi-Fi, you can always just connect to it using trusty old Bluetooth. You don't gotta worry about your Wi-Fi signal strength or having to download an extra app. Now, staying on the topic of connectivity, I do want to mention voice assistants because I do feel that it is tangentially connected and I couldn't find a better segue. Now, both of these soundbars have support for the Google Assistant and Alexa. So if you want to, you can always use either of these two soundbars as a smart speaker, and you can always use voice commands to control your music playback. And if you're using then you can always use voice commands to control your TV, just as long as you're using an HDMI connection, which shouldn't be a problem with the Sonos because Sonos gives you an HDMI cable included, whereas with the Bose, you are going to have to get your own HDMI cable. Alexa, what is the current price of Bitcoin?
One Bitcoin is worth $58,340 up less than 1% over the last 24 hours.
But if you don't want to, you don't have to use a voice assistant on either of these two soundbars. Now, some people don't like using voice assistants because of security concerns, but as long as you've got a phone in your pocket, that argument is basically out the window. But personally, I don't like using voice assistants on my soundbars because of accidental activations while I'm watching something, which can be a little annoying. But now let's talk about speaker setups, because these soundbars are fairly different from one another. The Bose has a single frontward firing tweeters, it's got two drivers flanking either side of the tweeter, and then there's a second pair of drivers on either end shooting out at like a 45-degree angle. Now, the Sonos also has a single tweeter and a total of 4 drivers similarly placed to the Bose, but the Beam also has an additional 3 radiators, 2 that shoot out the front and 1 that shoots out the back. So the Sonos does have a lot more going on under the hood than the Bose, but we are going to say final judgment until after the sound test. Now, both of these soundbars do have a companion app, and they both do basically the same thing. They both act as an aggregator for your various streaming services, subscriptions, and you can also use them to adjust the EQ of your soundbar. Now, before we jump into the sound test, just as a heads up, we are using my EQ settings here. With the Sonos, I did lower their treble and raise the bass because the Sonos does lean towards more a brighter sound signature. Whereas with the Bose, it does sound more balanced, but I did raise the bass on it so that you can get more physicality out of it.
Look at you. You got bamboozled. Let's go here. Recharging shields. You got bamboozled. Bamboozles. Bamboozles. It works. It rhymes. Recharging shields. Target's right in front of you. And they're hitting me. Those care packages likely should. You got bamboozled. Excuse me, decoy escape. Shots fired. Reload. Subject down.
Heaven just knows what it wants. Will I go back to the place where I belong? Everyone could break my heart, but I try my best to not fall apart. And I find it hard to let go. The debris keep keep me together. Gotta fight till the end, no pressure, no pressure. And I find it hard to say no. Could've want something better. Could've want to never say never. You'll be my pleasure. I got nothing to be scared of, because where people live, there is always love. I know the answers in my heart, so I'll try my best to not fall apart. And I find it hard to let go. The memories keep me together. Gotta fight till the end, no pressure, no pressure. And I find it hard to say no. Want something better. Could've want to now say never. You'll be my pleasure.
So, like you may have just heard, obviously any soundbar is going to sound better than your TV's built-in speakers. Most likely, your TV just has a pair of downward firing transducers that bounces sound off of the table. Now, besides your TV's built-in speakers just not being able to sound as open or get as loud as a soundbar, your TV's built-in speakers' biggest problem is just going to be the bass. When the bass really gets going, all you're just going to hear is this rattling mess. Basically, it's going to sound like your TV's falling apart. Whereas rattling just isn't an issue for soundbars. Now, when it comes to comparing these two soundbars, the Bose does outperform the Sonos in two key areas. First, there's max volume. The Bose does get a little louder than the Sonos. Now, the Sonos gets more than loud enough, but the Bose does get a little louder, which might matter for entertaining purposes. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people do like to use their soundbars to play music when they're entertaining guests. But more importantly, the Bose does have more bass than the Sonos. Now, you shouldn't expect a whole lot of wall-shaking bass from your soundbar, and if bass is really important to you, then you can always pair these soundbars with their respective subs. But when it comes to actually feeling what's on screen, the Bose does give you more physicality than the Sonos when they're used by themselves. Now, personally, I was a little surprised over this outcome because the Sonos does have those dedicated passive radiators, whereas the Bose just has those 4 drivers. But overall, with the Bose, you do feel what's on screen more than with the Sonos, which does add to immersing you more into your content. Now, before we wrap this video up, I do want to address the soundbar's ecosystems. Now, whether you've got multiple Sonos or Bose speakers, you can always group them up and have them play in sync and fill your whole house with music. However, Bose does have way more speakers to choose from and in a much wider price band. And even if you've got an older Bose speaker, like let's say a Bose SoundLink 2 that doesn't have Wi-Fi or AirPlay 2 support, you can still sync it up to your soundbar using Bose's SimpleSync. But more importantly, with Bose's SimpleSync, you can actually pair up your Bose NC700 headphones to the soundbar. So if you want to watch something late at night, you can do so and fully enjoy your content on your headphone and not have to worry about waking anybody else up because you can always just mute the soundbar. And if you are using your headphones, you can still use your active noise cancellation or ambient mode. So with all that being said, Obviously, you're going to be much better off going with the soundbar rather than sticking with your TV's built-in speakers. Now, when it comes to choosing between the Sonos Beam and Bose Smart Soundbar 300, personally, I gotta say that you are better off going with the Bose. From a performance standpoint, the Bose does get a little louder than the Sonos. But more importantly, the Bose does have more physicality in its bass, which allows you to better feel what's on screen and you feel more immersed. I also really like that as a Bose NC700 owner, I can pair my headphones up to my soundbar and fully enjoy my content late at night without having to worry about waking anybody up. And I also really like that the Bose has Bluetooth. So if anybody has to connect to it, they can do so directly. They don't need Wi-Fi and they don't have to download an app. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.